The humid night air of Louisiana clung to my skin like a second uncomfortable layer as I drove down Paradise Road. It was a path so familiar I could navigate it blindfolded, a straight shot through the dense woods that bordered Pineville, the town where I was born and raised. The digital clock on my dashboard glowed 3 a.m., a silent reminder of how late I was running. I had been helping my friend Mike fix up his old Ford until the early hours, lost in the camaraderie and cold beers. As my old pickup truck hummed along, the only illumination came from my headlights, cutting through the darkness and the occasional flicker of fireflies. Then, without warning, a massive shape darted into the road ahead. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest. "What in the world?" I muttered, straining my eyes against the darkness. The creature, caught in the beams of my headlights, paused. It was enormous, covered in dark fur, with eyes that caught the light and glowed back at me. For a moment it looked like a large dog, but something was terribly off. As I watched, transfixed, the beast did something that sent chills down my spine. It stood upright on two legs, its silhouette morphing into something eerily human. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. I reached for my phone, the idea of capturing this on camera fleeting through my mind, but my hands shook too much to be of any use. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and bolted into the woods, its movements unnaturally swift for something of its size. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my breath coming in short gasps, trying to process what I had just seen. Shaking off the shock, I finally managed to get the truck moving again. My thoughts raced as I drove, every shadow in the woods now a potential hiding spot for the beast. When I finally pulled up to my house, I noticed my neighbor, old Joe, standing on his porch, a cigarette glowing in the dark. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Eli," Joe called out, his voice cutting through the night. "Something like that, Joe, something like that," I replied, my voice still shaky. Joe walked over, concern etching his weathered face. "You all right, son? You're as white as a sheet." I leaned against my truck, the metal cool under my hands. I don't know what I saw, Joe, out there on Paradise Road. It was like a dog, but it stood up on two legs, ran like a man." Joe's eyes narrowed, and he took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember flaring in the darkness. "Sounds like the dog man, old folks' tales. Thought it was just a story to scare kids. But I've seen things in these woods, Eli, things that don't belong in our world." A shiver ran down my spine, Joe's words confirming my fears. This was no ordinary animal. It was something else, something out of a nightmare. "What do I do, Joe?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Joe flicked his cigarette into the night, watching it arc before it landed, extinguished. "You keep your eyes open, Eli, and whatever you do, don't go looking for it. Some things are better left alone." I nodded, though his advice did little to ease my anxiety. As I headed inside, the weight of what I had seen bore down on me. The encounter with the dog man wasn't just a random sighting. It felt like a warning, a herald of darker things to come. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The weeks following my encounter with the dog man turned my life into a living nightmare. The once comforting silence of the night now felt oppressive, filled with imagined whispers and the rustling of unseen creatures. My days were consumed with research, digging through old folklore and online forums for anything that resembled what I had seen. But the more I searched, the more isolated I felt, trapped between the disbelief of the rational world and the haunting reality of my experience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found myself at Mike's garage again, attempting to distract myself with the mundane task of replacing spark plugs. Mike had noticed the change in me, the jumpiness, the constant glancing over my shoulder. "Come on, Eli, you've been off ever since that night. What's really going on?" Mike pressed, handing me a wrench. I sighed, knowing I couldn't keep it from him any longer. "I saw something, Mike, on Paradise Road. It's going to sound crazy, but I think it was the dog man." Mike paused, his expression shifting from concern to incredulity. The dog man? Like from those old stories my grandpa used to scare us with? Yes, but it's not just a story, Mike. It was real. It stood on two legs and looked at me with human eyes. I can't explain it, but I know what I saw. Mike leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. Eli, that's out there, man. Are you sure it wasn't just a bear or something? I've seen bears, Mike. This wasn't a bear. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. We fell into a heavy silence, the only sound the clinking of tools and the distant barking of a dog. Finally, Mike spoke up, his voice softer. Okay, let's say you did see it, this dog man. What are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted, feeling the weight of my helplessness. But I can't just ignore it. It's like it's haunting me, following me. Mike nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. Well, if you're going hunting for monsters, you're not doing it alone. I'm with you. Despite the fear that gripped my heart, Mike's loyalty brought a small comfort. But as we planned, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into a story with no happy ending. The nights grew more restless, filled with dreams of being hunted through the dark woods by unseen eyes. And then it happened again. Driving home from Mike's, the clock nearing 3 a.m., a figure stepped onto the road, its form shrouded in moonlight. My heart stopped. It was the dog man, its eyes piercing the darkness, a silent challenge. This time it didn't run. It watched me, as if gauging my soul. With a howl that turned my blood to ice, it turned and vanished into the night. Shaking, I drove home, the encounter replaying over and over in my mind. When I arrived, old Joe was there again, as if he knew. Back so soon, Eli? He asked, his voice tinged with worry. It's back, Joe. It was waiting for me. I think it wants something from me. Joe's face grew serious, and he stepped closer. You need to be careful, Eli. You're playing a dangerous game. Some forces are best left undisturbed. But I need to do something, I insisted, my voice desperate. Then remember, knowledge is your weapon. Learn its nature, its bounds. But never forget, Eli, you're in its territory now. Respect that, or it might be the last lesson you ever learn. His words echoed in my mind as I lay awake that night, the reality of my situation sinking in. I was the hunted, caught in a game of shadows and whispers, and I had no choice but to play. The days blurred into one another, each night a repetition of shadows and whispers that danced just beyond the edge of my sanity. My obsession with the dog man had consumed me, every moment spent researching, preparing, and waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Mike and old Joe had become my confidants, the only ones who knew the depth of my torment. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of red and purple, Mike and I sat on my porch, going over our plans once more. The air was thick with the impending storm, both in the sky and in our hearts. Eli, are you sure about this? Mike asked, his brow furrowed with concern. We don't have to go through with it, you know. We can find another way. I shook my head, my resolve steel. There's no turning back now, Mike. It's not just about me anymore. If we don't do something, who knows what might happen next? I have to face it. Mike nodded, his face set in determination. All right then. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. You're not alone in this, remember that. The plan was simple, yet fraught with danger. We would venture into the heart of the woods, to the place where I had seen the dog man vanish that first night. There, we hoped to confront it, to end this nightmare once and for all. As night descended, cloaking the world in darkness, we set out, armed with flashlights and the meager protection of a hunting knife each. The forest welcomed us with its usual cacophony of sounds, yet beneath it all lay a silence that spoke of anticipation, of a final act yet to unfold. We had been walking for what seemed like hours when old Joe's voice stopped us in our tracks. Eli, Mike, hold up, he said, emerging from the shadows like a ghost. We hadn't told him of our plan, yet here he was, as if drawn by the same force that pulled us toward our destiny. Joe, what are you doing here? I asked, surprise and relief warring within me. I couldn't let you do this alone, Joe said, his gaze piercing the darkness. This creature, this dog man, it's part of something bigger, something ancient. You need to understand, it's not just a beast to be hunted. His words hung in the air, a warning that chilled me to the bone. Yet there was no turning back. Together, the three of us pressed on, deeper into the heart of darkness. It wasn't long before we found it, or perhaps it found us. The dogman stood in a clearing, bathed in the moonlight, its presence commanding, yet not threatening. It was as if it had been waiting for us, for this confrontation. "Eli," it spoke, its voice a guttural echo of thoughts and fears. "Why do you seek me?" I stepped forward, my voice steady. "I want to end this, the fear, the nightmares. I want my life back." The dogman tilted its head, considering. "You seek peace from a war you do not understand. This is not a battle to be won, Eli. It is a balance to be maintained." "Balance? What balance?" I demanded, my confusion and fear mingling. "The balance between worlds, between the seen and unseen. I am not your enemy, Eli. I am a guardian, a keeper of the threshold." Its words struck a chord within me, a realization that this was not a monster to be slain, but a being that existed beyond my understanding of the world. "So what now?" Mike asked, his voice a whisper in the sacred silence of the clearing. "Now you go," the dogman said, turning away. "Remember what you have learned. Respect the balance and live your life. Do not seek us out again." As we made our way back through the forest, the weight of our encounter pressing down on us, I realized that the dogman was right. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some thresholds uncrossed. I had sought a monster and found wisdom, a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my days. The nightmare was over, but the journey had just begun.